Okay, I'm recording. Announcements. We have a test on the 12th and 14th of next week. Reminder, that's a programming test, so you will be writing code. I'll give you some scenario, tell you things I'm looking for, toasts and clearings and calculations and getting information from user, maybe reading a file, things like that. Okay, so that's what we're up to next week. That material is labs 1 through 7 for the test. And in the meantime, we are on lab 12. Any questions about what to expect on the test or other labs or something that you're having trouble finishing? Anything? Okay, no. All right, so let's get on with the new stuff. There's only one example program, 2 images, because again, it's one of those Gradle things and Android manifest things. And then it's just one program, but it's sort of a more, sort of a longish program for us. So, okay. So it's one of those ones where you need to do something to the Gradle. The new thing is Volley. So we're going to, before on Tuesday, we used 3 different libraries to work with images. We did Picasso, we did Glide, and we did Coil. And this time we're going to read a file off the internet, a text file. So that's what we're going to use Volley for. And then we're going to go back and use Picasso because there's an image, because I like images. And I think you can use Volley. We're going to get JSON out of Volley. But I think you can use Volley to do the image, but Volley is a little more cumbersome, as you'll see, rather than just sort of the image is pretty easy. Reading a text file and parsing the text file is a little more difficult. So when it comes to the image, I'll go back to one of those other libraries. Okay. But so we edit the Gradle to say that we're going to use something. So normally when we're using something, if it's pretty standard, but doesn't come down automatically, we say we're going to import it. But sort of more unusual things, we have to say, we have to put in the Gradle and then they're available to import. So it's, for some things, it's a 2-step process. We also, again, we're accessing the internet, both with Volley and with Picasso. And so we want to edit the manifest to allow that. And in particular, I'm going to have the JSON I'm going to be reading is on my website, and my website is HTTP rather than HTTPS. So I'm going to also add the attribute about clear text traffic. Okay. So not, information that's not encrypted. Okay. So we're going to have to look out to do those 2 things. So far I have a working hello world, and let's download the program and put the pieces together. Okay, so it is this Harry Potter Volley JSON. Let's see what I have here. Let me open open up the manifest. And we know we need the permission thing. I'm going to copy that and open up the manifest here. And the permission, I'm going to put here. And then I also had the, down here in line 13, I also had the use is clear text traffic true. And that goes here in the application. Here. Okay. So I've edited the manifest. I didn't copy for you the Gradle, but I have in the KT, I believe what I need for the Gradle. Or if not, I'll type it in from what that picture I have. I don't think there's anything in values, nothing in values to worry about. We're getting things off the internet now, so there shouldn't be anything in drawable. So no images there, but we are going to have the layout. Copy the layout, Control A, Control C, and then paste it over here. Layout, activity underscore main code, and paste in the activity. Let's have a look at it in design. So there's a spinner where you're going to pick a Harry Potter movie. It's going to tell you the director and the writer and the producer and who wrote the music. And it's going to have like a movie poster, and then it's going to have one of those buttons where you go over to YouTube. So we've done like this with the horses, and you did it with the kids song if you're that far along. But that JSON was a raw file that we read locally. Now we're going to be getting the images in the JSON remotely. They're going to be on the internet. Okay, and now we need those, but we want to move over to the KT, the code. And yeah, down here I have, here's the implementation stuff. That's what I need to put into. So I didn't give it to you as the Gradle, but I told you what to put into the Gradle. And I just copied the package, which is a no-no. That's what confused me the last time. Let me do it right this time. Copy all but the package. And paste all but the package. All of a sudden it said, I don't know what you mean by R, and that was all about the package. Okay. Now it doesn't know what I mean by some things here, response, because this is the Volley stuff. And so to understand Volley, I've got to do the Gradle, and it's the module Gradle. But first I have to know what to put in there, and I have that as a up here as a comment. Here's what I'm adding to the Gradle, Picasso and Volley. And I'm putting that into the Gradle in the implementation section. There's that in the implementation section. When you change a Gradle, you have to sync. And now hopefully when I come back over to KT, it's fixing itself. It's fixing itself. So it now knows what I mean by how to import Picasso. It now knows what I mean by Volley. And so these things are now understood. And the things related to them, like response, are understood. Okay. So I'm going to stop. That was the hello world. Let me start this now that it is the Harry Potter Volley JSON. Here's my old. So here is that Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. The director was Chris Columbus. The writer was Steve Kloves, producer Heyman, the music Williams. Here's the movie poster. There's a go over to YouTube for the trailer. I can change to the Half-Blood Prince. Now it's the director is Yates, and I can go over to YouTube. And okay, there's the Half-Blood Prince. Okay. All right, so there's just a bunch of imports. Okay. There's a bunch of comments. Okay, I'm gonna say all these things. Okay. So the package, the imports, the comment. I usually put my comments above the imports, but I didn't this time. I'm in the onCreate. This is just a big collection of relate to the interface stuff. So I had a spinner, I had a text view for the director, I had a text view for the writer, I had a text view for the producer, I had a text view for the music, I had an image view for the poster, and I had a button to take me over to YouTube for the trailer. Can't swear they're all actual trailers, but that's what I called it anyway. Okay, I'm going out to the internet, and I put down an explicit URL for the JSON, but I'm also going to get some images. So I put down what I call the base URL. Then I'm going to add to when I know what the poster is. So I'm going to get these images off of my site. And again, I remind you that my site, that's what this note is about here. My site is an HTTP site. So I needed that clear text traffic. So that's what that comment's about. So I have the URL for the JSON, and then I have another URL that's just my base URL. Then I will add to get the images. I'm going to have a JSON array. So I'm going to read the file, and in there's going to be some JSON. Let's have a look at this file. You should always know what the JSON looks like. Otherwise, you're sort of working in the dark. So here, I think it's bigger. So here's what the JSON looks like. It starts with a curly bracket, so it's starting with an object. That object has a property called films. That property is an array because it's followed, the colon is followed by a square bracket. And then the elements of that array are objects, which I can tell by, again, the curly brackets. And then there are those objects, those inner objects are defined by the properties title, director, writer, producer, image, YouTube code, and music, and then they have values for the first one, different values for the second one, and so on. So that's what the file looks like. Okay. So this was all set up so far. Connect to the interface, establish the URL, establish there's going to be an array. The main thing's not an array, the main thing's an object, but there's an array in there. So there's going to be a JSON array. And then this is my usual other string array for and I'm always not very careful with my words, array list, mutable list. This is to be used with a spinner. Okay, so I'm going to pull out just the names of the movies. You saw that in the spinner was just the names of the movies. Okay. Now I've got to, now I'm going to work with Volley. Volley's the thing that I'm going to use to go over and get the text file and then read the text file. I can get different types of things off from the internet. I can get pictures, I can get simple text. In this case, I'm going to get JSON. Okay, and Volley knows these things and has different methods for the different things that you might be getting. So in this case, we're going to be getting a JSON object. Again, let's look back at the JSON we're grabbing, and it starts with the curly brackets. So what we grab from the file is an object. The other thing you can start with in JSON is an array. So you might read a file that starts with an array. somebody says, not now, but sort of outside of class, or you can ask me inside of class, but I don't have time to do it right off the top of my head. But if you say, would you give us an example where it started with an array, then I would. But this one starts with an object. Okay. Now let's give a little recap of dealing with something from the internet. So when you're getting something from the internet, you have a device, in this case, a phone, or an emulated phone, and that is the client. And then you are going to get something from the web, and the thing you're going to is a server. So a hand, I don't think it was a question. I think it was just a hand sort of above a shoulder level, but okay. If it was a question, feel free to ask. Okay. So we are going to, that's what Volley is going to help us do, to manage this interaction with the internet. So it will make it's going to help. We are the phone, the emulated phone. The app is a client, and it is going to make a request of a web server, LaSalle's web server, where my site is on. And then the web server is going to respond, hopefully with a JSON file. If not, if it's not a JSON file, or there's nothing there, if there's nothing at that address, or it's not JSON, then it might respond with an error. So this is the interaction that we are trying to manage. There's going to be a request. There's going to be a response. The response, there's sort of two possibilities for the response. A good response of here's that JSON you asked for, or a bad response of some error happened. And Volley is going to sort of force us to deal with both. So we must write two methods. Here's what to do if it was good. Here's what to do if it was bad. All right, so here we go. So Volley has a bunch of things. One of them is a JSON object request. So first thing is I'm establishing here a queue. I can ask for a number of things on the web. I'm only going to ask for one, so it's not much of a queue because there's going to be one thing in it. But in general, I could ask for multiple things on the web. If I asked for the pictures, if I used Volley to get my pictures rather than Picasso, then I might have more things in my queue as I asked for images and so on. But I'm only going to ask for the JSON. But still, in principle, you may ask for many things off the internet, and so you're going to put them in a queue. Okay, so that's what this is. There's a bunch of, this is where my requests will go. Down at the bottom, I'm declaring the queue here. I'm going to use it way down at the bottom. Let me scroll way down to the bottom. And here's us using the request. So we're going to make a request, and then we're going to add it to the queue of requests. It's this little dinky thing at the bottom. If you forget it, nothing happens because you never did make your request. Here's the actual, the system actually saying, okay, go do it. Everything else is preparing to do it. You're preparing what to do if it works, what to do if it fails, but this is the actual doing it. So I have my I'm shouting at you. Nothing happens if you don't do this. Okay, so back up. Okay, so again, Volley is going to handle this request, response, possible error, action for us. So we set up a queue to actually do the actual requesting. Then we make this individual request, and it is specifically, we are requesting JSON. You could request generic text. There are other things it understands, but it understands image. But you'll see this is more complicated. than just what we were doing with Picasso. So we'll keep the images simple and use Picasso or Glide or Coil, but this more complicated thing we'll reserve for files like JSON. Okay. So we're making a JSON object request. We're going to use a get. There's sort of two standard methods for making requests, get and post. Get is less secure. So if your request, sometimes you fill out something on the client. Sometimes you fill out some information on the client and you send it up to a server, and that information you may want to be encoded to be private, and then you might want a post. You may want that information to be treated more securely, then you might want to post. But we're just going up and grabbing some JSON, not doing anything that really needs protecting. So we're going to use a get method. I had a variable above called URL because we need to know what we're trying to access. There is this thing that you have to have that's null. There's some signature of this JSON object request. There's this third thing. Every time I've seen it, it's been null. So, all right. Now, this doesn't happen instantaneously. So you have to, it's like, going out to the internet is like dealing with a user. You have to wait until they do something. So you are going to listen for something to happen. So we've been listening from the start. We were listening for the user to click a button or to check a checkbox or to pick something in the spinner. So you're used to listeners. But when we were dealing with text files previously, they were local. We could just go grab them. We needed input streams and stuff like that, but we didn't need listeners because we could do it right away. A listener is, I don't know when this is going to happen, sort of watch out for it, and then when it comes, deal with it. So here's the listener is going to wait until you get a response back from the website, and then you're going to just figure out what you want to do with the response. So again, so we're setting up this request. The request is going to have either a good response or a bad response. We needed to know what method we're using get. We need to know where we're going, URL. Here's the one that I don't quite know what it is, but it's null. And now I'm going to say, here we're establishing a listener, and we're going to say what to do when I get a response from the listener. So there is an argument. I'm using that sort of arrow notation of a function. And so this is the argument of the function. So I'm making a handler for the listener. And the handler comes in with a response. And then the question is, what am I going to do with that response? Well, what is the response? The response is the JSON. We got a JSON object. We expect this thing to be JSON. So the response is some kind of JSON. Why do I keep doing that? And so I'm saying, take my response and then get the JSON array that's in there, which is named films. We saw that there was a JSON object. So we know we got some JSON. We know it's an object because we're in a method saying get JSON object. And then we know it has a property called films, which is an array. That's what we're saying here. Get that array called films, which is part of the response. And I'm calling that my JSON array. So now I have the JSON that is all of the movies, the Harry Potter movies. I want to make now I have the information. I can populate my spinner. All of this stuff right now is in the response. Everything on this app is based on getting this JSON. What's in the spinner, the information I show, everything's based on this information. So it's all the stuff sort of happens in this listener. I'm looping through the array. I'm grabbing the ith object, and then I'm grabbing its title and adding it to film titles. This is what I'm going to use to populate my array, my array adapter to populate my spinner. We have all these different ways of looping. Sometimes you loop sort of over an array or a list, and you can sort of say for item in. When you have a JSON array, doesn't really support that, or at least not easily. So you can't do the, it's not me sort of forgetting that there's that nicer way to loop for JSON array. Sometimes I do forget it. So it's not, you know, I'm not telling you that I'm wonderful, I'm not, but I'm just saying, this is a case that I didn't forget that there's a nicer way to loop over the array. It's for a JSON array, there's not that nicer way to loop over it. So you're back to a more standard work with the index. Okay, so it doesn't have an iterator, or sort of a nice built-in exposed iterator, or whatever all those fancy words are. So we're back to our sort of old-fashioned work through the indices. So I'm working through the indices of 0 until the length. So the until won't go to the, it will go up to, but not including the length. So remember, the indices go from 0 to the length -1. But the until sort of takes care of that. You know, don't go up to length, go up, you know, it's exclusive, not inclusive of this bound. Okay. So loop over my indices, grab the movie and grab its title to add to my film titles, because that's what I'm going to use in my array adapter. Here is my array adapter down here, and the usual thing. Film titles, which I just made, is a code array. Set up the array adapter, use the array adapter to populate the spinner, and now I'm ready for my spinner event. Here's my usual spinner event. On selected item listener, there's this nothing, then there's the on selected. I work usually with the view and the int. I'm toasting out the movie based on this view, just to show that I can do it. But what's more interesting to me this time is the I. That is the index of the JSON array that I want. So I made a parallel array. Some of you don't like my parallel arrays, but they're useful, so sorry. I had the array of JSON things, then I got out of my JSON file, and then I made the smaller, simpler, just the titles array, and then I used that to put into my spinner. So the spinner index, so that little array I made and the big array I made were parallel arrays. They share an index. The spinner gives me the index. So when I touch the spinner and choose something, or the user does, then I am given the index. And because the JSON array is a parallel array, I can use that index with it. So that's what I mean by a parallel array, two arrays that sort of share the index, that I can get the index from one and use it with the other, because they sort of have this correspondence. And so I'm getting the JSON the ith JSON object. So here's my JSON array. Again, there was no nice way, oh, I'm not looping anyway. So I'm grabbing the ith object, and then I'm grabbing a property of the object. So here's the director property, the writer property, the producer property, the music, and they're all going into the text view for the director, text view for the writer, producer, music, okay? And here is Picasso. So this is the image, this is the movie poster. Picasso, and this is a little more cumbersome than the coil, but I had written this before coil, I'd written this before Kotlin. But here's Picasso, get load, I'm using my base URL. Remember, I defined above my base URL, and then I'm adding to that. And here's something I got to point out about a base URL that you have to watch. When you have a base URL, you've got to figure out whether or not you have the slash in there. So I have that slash. This is a Harry_Potter_2. That's a folder. And then between a folder and a file, I'm going to need a slash. My base URL has that slash. If it didn't, then when I was down here adding the file in Picasso, I would need to add the slash. So you just have to be careful when you're coding. Do you or don't you, are you or are you not responsible for the slash? The slash was in my base URL, so I wasn't responsible for it in coding. But sometimes you might be given a URL and it doesn't have the slash. So either add it or add it in code, or add it up there in when you sort of establish it. But here is me writing the file. So the base URL plus the name of the file, and then that goes into the IV poster. So that would be a little more succinct if I had used COIL. The COIL syntax is a little sleeker than the Picasso syntax. I'm still in the spinner. I'm done the, if they don't do anything to the spinner, I'm not doing anything. Here's my button to move over to the trailer. This is just the same old, same old. I'm getting from the spinner the select item position. When I'm in the spinner event, it hands me the I. When I'm in some other thing, when I'm in the button, I have to go get the I. So this is me getting the index, the selected item position. I'm grabbing the position of the spinner that the spinner's at. I'm going to get the, I call it YTC, the YouTube code. And that was one of the properties of my object. So I get I get the object with ID. So that's the object that the user chose, and I'm getting the YouTube code. That was one of my properties. Again, I don't always do these the same. I think when I was doing the horse, I think I called it horse YouTube, and maybe I had some capital letters. And then this time around, I didn't say Harry Potter, I just said YouTube code. Other times I'll just say YouTube. Sometimes I capitalize things, sometimes I don't. Look at the file. Don't think you know what I am doing, or I always do it this way. I don't always do it anyway. I'm not that consistent. So get the YouTube together, then string it together. Here's what you put before the video, then the YouTube code, and you're using this intent. So that's what moves you over to YouTube. Okay, so that is the end of the button. There is the button. That's the end of the response. So if I got a good response, I'm establishing my JSON array. I am loading up my spinner. I'm showing you what I want to do if they choose the spinner event, and I'm also taking care of my button event. So that was if things are good. What if things are bad? I'm just toasting out some error message, making the error message a string and toasting it out. I hope I never see that toast. Okay, you want to see something there, put in a bad URL or put in a URL that's not JSON, and you can see some of the error messages. I'm hoping not to see any error message. There's the end of my error listener. There's the end of my request object. But again, one more time, if you set up the request, but you don't add it to the queue, it doesn't happen. You need to put it in the queue. That's what sends it up and gets the listeners listening. This just says what to do when you make a request, but it doesn't make the request. This makes the request. And I'm at the bottom. Questions, I'll show you what you have to do for whatever lab this is, maybe 12. And it will be this, except it'll be a different file and different, you know, it'll be the same but different. Okay, so you're going to work with the Internet Movie Database. But again, I just put a bunch of stuff on my site, make life easy. Now we're ready to work with APIs. I hope you realize that, you know, if we're getting JSON off of the internet, we're ready to work with an API. That's what APIs mostly do these days, is give you access to information in a JSON format and maybe images. And they'll tell you where the images are located in their JSON file. So we're ready to do work with APIs now. The problem with some APIs, if you're trying to teach a course on how to interact with an API, is if a whole classroom of people are interacting with an API, the API shuts down. It thinks you're trying to, you know, jam it up. Because LaSalle makes all the traffic from LaSalle, they try to make look to the outside world like there's just one address, LaSalle. And so it looks like this one address is just pounding the crap out of the site, and so the site will shut you down. So I often use my site because my site won't shut you down. Okay, blah, blah, blah. All right, so I'm going to work with stuff that's off my site. My site's HTTP, do that clear traffic thing or nothing works. Here's like the base URL. Here's in particular the JSON. I think it's the same format of JSON, but let's have a look. It is. So almost, that's my usual style. Yeah, so I start with an object. I have a property, there's an array. I have been known, I am occasionally sort of somewhat dyslexic, not you know, not the way some people are really dyslexic, but I've been known to reverse letters. So I'll sometimes say I am BD or something like that. So you've got to watch, you've got to read the file and look what I'm doing. I think I've cleaned up my mistakes, but who knows? So there are images like the Shawshank, and again, it's movie posters. There's not a period. That's just the period probably of my sentence or something. It's not a sentence anyway. I guess it was the end of sentence. But those things should be there. There's the poster for the Shawshank Redemption, which I've never seen. Horror. You're going to use Volley to read the file. So just like what I've done, you're going to extract the JSON, just like what I've done. You're going to put something in the spinner. I'm saying put in the rank and the title. So not just simply the title, but add the rank. So some concatenation. When they do something in the spinner, display the corresponding information, like what I did, have a button that goes to YouTube, like what I did. So you're just, can you play with my file and change what you need to change without making it die? Okay. Questions? Okay. Then I will stop recording and